So I don't think The Wheel of Time really needs much of an introduction. It's easily one of the most popular, most influential fantasy series of all time, even more so now that it's been over for 10 years and has finally gotten a big budget adaptation. So obviously, given the types of books I like to read, it's one I had been waiting to get into for a long time. And I have finally done so. So today we're going to be talking about the first two books in the series, The Eye of the World and The Great Hunt. Spoiler-free style, because I mostly want this to be a gauge for people to see if the series is for them. I'll discuss my plans in a bit for as we move further into the series, but I might do more spoiler stuff there. We'll see how it goes. So for those who are unaware, The Wheel of Time takes place in, your classic medieval fantasy setting, and we follow a group of young adults from the small town of Emmonsfield who are quickly whisked away into a magical adventure when Moiraine, the Aes Sedai, the sort of wizard of this world, comes to town, tells one of them they may be the chosen one, there's a Dark Lord rising, and they gotta go on a quest. Yeah, I wanted to start this just bringing up probably the most obvious talking point everyone mentions when they talk about The Eye of the World, and that it is very derivative of The Lord of the Rings. It obviously has enough unique about it that, you wouldn't really call it a complete ripoff, but its entire setup and general plot progression is very reminiscent of Fellowship. But I think what's really fascinating about this book in particular is that was kind of the point. Robert Jordan actually set out to sort of do his own take on The Lord of the Rings with this book, but with a little bit of a twist. The main difference here being his approach to the characters. Now, The Lord of the Rings, wonderful characters, lovely cast, we all love them, but you wouldn't really say they are a realistic portrayal of human beings. And, of course they didn't have to be, it's a fantasy story. But that's kind of what Jordan wanted to do here. What if you or I, who grew up in a small town, was suddenly whisked away on a magical quest to save the world? You might be a bit more reluctant than a jolly hobbit. So as Moiraine whisks away Rand, Mat, Perrin, Egwene, and Nynaeve, they're not overly thrilled about it. In fact, they kind of hate it. And so while we are following this quest on this book as they're exploring this big wide world they've never seen before, stopping at these towns and villages, making friends and foes, discovering creepy ancient magic, learning more about their places in the world, we are also constantly dealing with their struggle of what's going on here. None of them want to be here, none of them particularly like Moiraine, and sometimes don't trust her, and they just straight up don't believe that they could have a bigger role in all of this. And I think that this element of the story takes what could have been a really derivative and generic fantasy story, and makes it far more interesting and engaging than it is on paper. This book is full of stuff you've seen before, but I think Jordan just added enough of an interesting twist to it all that made it stand out as just one of the better executed examples of a story like this. I also really enjoyed how he implemented magic into this world. There are multiple magic systems going on here, but not only do they feel very mysterious, they also feel extremely dangerous. In fact, there are a lot of light horror elements to this world that make everything just feel all the more urgent, and leads Eye of the World to be what I think is a great start to this series. Though it's not without some issues, I still wasn't completely sold on every single character here. There were some pacing problems, maybe the book didn't need to be as long as it was, and I think the whole climax and ending of this book didn't really do enough for me. It was kind of just whatever, like I was like, okay, yeah, big action, big set pieces, I suppose. Didn't really have that element a lot of the other aspects of this book had that made it stand out to me at all. And I think probably the biggest knock against this book, which again I still think is great, but I did not continue with the series for 2 more years. Yeah, while I enjoyed The Eye of the World a lot, I gave it 4 stars when I originally read it. I was kind of like, that was cool. And then I moved on to something else. There wasn't really this massive hook in The Eye of the World that made me immediately want to keep reading the series. I hear from everyone that it gets exponentially better after the first book, and I believe them. I still had the full intention of reading more, that's why I bought most of the series, but it was just never the biggest priority for me, because while I thought the first book was great, I didn't love it. But here we finally are to talk about how the series continues in its second installment, The Great Hunt. And, I'm an idiot. This book was fantastic. This was amazing. You see, what The Great Hunt does is just take what was so great about the first book, its interesting world and magic system and characters, and then it leaves behind some of the pacing issues, the derivativeness, and throws them into a story that feels far more original than the first book, is far better paced, and constantly keeps you wanting more. As evident from the title, this book is basically a giant chase. Characters are constantly on the run, whether that be from people or after people. We continue to expand this vast world, which is only growing more and more interesting with each new location we visit, and the characters are finally starting to come to grips with their new place in this world, and are overall just becoming even more compelling. I'm really starting to love this cast here. Our main character, Rand, is so interesting because, after stuff he learns about himself in the last book and in this book, he really has this crazy internal struggle that he is constantly dealing with. And it was so interesting to see how it affects his relationship with all of his childhood friends and people that he just met. I also really enjoy Nynaeve's character. She's a bit older than the rest of our main characters, and she sort of acts as this mother figure towards them. She's very protective of them, and I enjoyed her and Egwene's plotline in this book as they head to the White Tower, the home of the Aes Sedai, of course further expanding the world, but giving the characters a lot more growth as well. I was kind of worried that this whole subplot with them would not be as interesting as the main one, and that it would sort of just feel like this thing happening off on the side, but I think that Jordan really cleverly tied it back to the main hunt that's happening, and it led to a finale that absolutely blew me away. The last few chapters of The Great Hunt were crazy, and in all the best ways too. A massive climax culmination of everything that had been building up to this point, something I was kind of worried we might not get because, the series is so long. I wasn't sure if there were big things that he was saving for the sequel, but no, pretty much everything he had built up that I wanted to see happened at the end here. But at the same time, there were huge revelations that, unlike the first book, really made me want to keep reading. I cannot wait to continue this now. While people say I'm not close to the peak of the series yet, I'm finally starting to understand why it is so revered. Because The Great Hunt just has excellent character work, an excellent narrative with great pacing, and a really satisfying payoff. Coming off of stuff I recently read like Oathbringer, it's very easy to see Robert Jordan's influence. And overall, I could not be happier with how this turned out. I absolutely loved this one. Gave it a 4.5, not quite at that 5-star yet, though I do have a feeling that quite a few of these might reach that level. So as I've said before, going forward, I am going to sort of be alternating the Wheel of Time with the First Law books. So depending how it goes, I might be doing some back to back, I don't know. Don't expect a video on every single book in this series. I'll likely be combining them like I did with this one. I am aware of the alleged slog that happens in the middle of this series. If I do find that people's assessment of those books is accurate, maybe I'll do one video on all of those. But yeah, I think that the next year is going to be full of Wheel of Time content here, and I cannot be more excited because I am already super into it, and I know we have only scratched the surface. I'll briefly talk about the show too. So the show came out when I first read The Eye of the World. In fact, that's what inspired me to read The Eye of the World back then. And I watched a couple episodes, and I thought they were decent. There were some big changes to the book that I wasn't super big on, but overall I thought it was a fine adaptation so far. But I actually stopped. Not because fans were saying it was getting worse, and it ended up pissing a lot of the fan base off, but mainly because I was hearing they were pulling elements from later books to bring into the series. I can't comment on if that was executed well, but I do understand why adaptations of really long works have to do this. Realistically, they're not going to be able to adapt the entire series in order. If they want to get to stuff, they are going to have to condense things. I've heard they did not pull it off well, but again, that remains to be seen with me. But either way, that is why I stopped watching the show. I hear at this point, with the second season, they've been pulling stuff from as late as the 5th book, and I really have no interest in continuing the show if I'm going to be spoiled on later stuff, especially if it is an inferior product. That being said, I am still very curious about the show is handling certain things. Don't have super high hopes, but I do think I am going to actually watch it once I have read at least the first 5 books. At the very least, it'll probably be better than Rings of Power, maybe. We'll see. I don't know. Anyway, that'll do it for this one. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts on anything Wheel of Time related in the comments down below. Just be mindful, of course, no spoilers after the second book. Come on. Yeah. We've been doing a lot of reviews lately, so I think we're going to do more of a fun discussion next time, so I will see you then.